So, Mr. Bond, I hear that you are trying to wean yourself off of camp. So I continue through my watch of commissioned reviews related to James Bond. I was commissioned to review one specific film from each of the different actors who played him. And I'm up to Roger Moore, and I got selected to do For Your Eyes Only, which I have seen before. It's been a while since I saw it, but I remember liking it. I remember liking how much more grounded it was, especially coming on the heels of Moonraker, because holy crap. And, like, people rag on Moonraker for the fact that it's James Bond in space, but, like, James Bond in space isn't what's wrong with Moonraker. It's the absurdity in the cartoon sound effects and the fact that a pigeon does a friggin' double take. Like, Moonraker is not a James Bond film. It is a parody of a James Bond film. I'm diverting, though. After that, they went with something much more grounded. A very standard Cold War era spy plot about British agents and agents of Russia competing to get the same device each before the other one does. Pretty straightforward. Roger Moore, he doesn't really alter his performance, but it works much better here than in something like Moonraker, because here's the funny thing. I don't think that Roger Moore's own personal camp is actually a detriment to the role of James Bond. It becomes a detriment in stories like Moonraker when everything else tries to rise to his level and be as campy as he is. Here, however, he himself is the campiest element, which makes him the fun part of an otherwise fairly serious story. And it's like he's almost the inverse of a straight man. And that's fun. But when everything else going on around him is as campy as he is, that's not fun, because everything's pitched at the same level. So I actually find that his delivery of, he's all about suave. It's suave up to the nth degree. And occasionally, like, a little bit of side-eye, a little bit of, really? I got to deal with this now? And not taking things too seriously, which, when the situations are relatively serious, I do think actually works pretty well. And I think he is good in this. And my memory, for the most part, held true. This is pretty solid. Rewatching it, I did discover a whole bunch of things that I hadn't really realized about it, and rediscovered a handful of things like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. But broadly speaking, it's a good, solid piece of work. And most of the action scenes are good. Some of the chases are neat. And, like, the injections of humor, they're still there, but they don't feel like they are taking the wind out of the situation. Like, good example, relatively early into the film, Bond is trying, he and Melina, who's the main Bond girl in this one, they're trying to escape this compound, and they run towards Bond's car, which blows up. And he goes, well, I hope you have a car. So they go to Melina's car, which is this raggedy, gnarly, like, looks like he can maybe on a good day go 40 miles an hour looking thing. And Bud just kind of pauses for a second. He's like, ugh. But that's the extent of the joke. There's no wacky wah, 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 or, they just let the moment be the joke. And then we have a legitimate chase scene after that. So that kind of integration of humor is actually pretty dang well done in this. I feel like this movie, whether it's your favorite of his era or not, I feel like it has the best balance of the humor of his time that doesn't derail the rest of the movie. It really does work pretty well here. It's got a good supporting cast, too. I mentioned Melina. I suppose I'll highlight her for a hot minute. Forget my choice of words. Melina is actually one of my favorite Bond girls from the ones I've seen. Keeping in mind, I haven't seen every single Bond film. But what I really like about her is she has her own agenda, her own agency. She's not just swept up in this story by coincidence or because Bond is basically pointed at her and saying, and his bosses go get her, tiger. It's neither of those things. She is out for revenge for her parents who get gunned down by the people involved in the thing that James has been sent to do. But James doesn't know who she is. He hasn't been sent to collect her, and she's not, wrapped up in a way that he needs to save her. She's there for revenge. Really, the first meaningful thing we see her do is straight out kill a guy from a distance with a crossbow. Like, okay, nice. And she is way more focused and on point, and definitely much more helpful than most Bond girls are. She is a legitimately well-constructed, well-thought-out, and well-performed character with one thing that I'm like, I don't understand why they did that, and then a number of things where I'm like, oh, okay, which aren't really about her, but it's an offshoot. I'll explain when I get there. So, the first thing is she's dubbed over. And not very well. By that, I don't mean the performance of whatever actress they had dub her over gives a bad performance. She doesn't. Actually, it's a pretty good vocal performance, but it doesn't match the lip movements very well at all. So it's super obvious dubbing as opposed to like bad performance dubbing. It's not that. And more to the point, like having looked into the actress, like even a cursory look into her, like, yeah, she's French and she has an accent, but she speaks English perfectly fine. There was no need to dub her. I suppose technically the character wasn't French, but like just change the character to be French so she has a French accent. Like, are you really that roped into what was in the source material? I don't know. That was completely unnecessary. She didn't need to be dubbed, and it's distracting, unfortunately. The other thing is there's a couple of other female characters who pop up. And I found myself trying to figure out why in the hell are these characters even here? And then it hit me towards the end. They are here to fill the roles that Melina as a character doesn't. And because for all the things that Melina brings to the table, there are a couple of standard, these are supposed to happen with some Bond girl in this movie tropes that she doesn't fulfill, so they have other characters who do that and virtually nothing else. There is a character she's a countess, but I guess like she's, I think she's just straight up a prostitute if I'm being completely honest, but she's a woman of leisure kind of thing, and she's kind of scamming people or whatever, but she has absolutely no function in the plot whatsoever. She's just there for Bond to bed her and then for her to get killed. Because, well, Bond has to sleep with somebody over the course of the runtime. You can't just leave it until the very end where he gets to have, whoever the main Bond girl is as the credits come up. No. It's got to happen at some point during, so she fills that role. And also, we have to have a woman killed by the bad guys, and she fills that role as well. And then there's BB, and BB, oh god, BB's really weird. I think BB might be the one kind of unnecessary camp element. She's this figure skater who is being sponsored by a guy named Christados, who's played by Julian Glover, who turns out to be the villain. I'll come back to him. So she's being sponsored by him, and that's her into the story. But like she throws herself at Bond, and like there's some very weird, awkward humor and some jokes around the idea that Bond says flat out, "I'm too old for you," which is kind of funny on a meta level because the actress who plays her is only a year younger than the actress who plays Melina. That said, she does clock as a heck of a lot younger than she actually is. I mean, she was fairly young when she played this, but she clocks in her like late teens, whereas Melina has a sense of maturity about her. But like, anyways, I just found that funny. But like, she doesn't really do anything meaningful. Except she shows up at the very end, again, at Christados' lair, where the final thing happens. And that's when I realized, they needed a damsel for the very end. And Melina doesn't fill that role either. So because Melina is such a strong character and doesn't fill a lot of the standard Bond girl tropes, instead of just dropping those things, they inject two completely unnecessary characters just so they can still have a Bond girl for James to sleep with during the actual runtime of the movie and one for him to rescue at the end. Because Melina doesn't do those things. It's odd. So I mentioned Chris Stardust, played by Julian Glover, who he's always good. He's especially good for a villain, the kind of suave, collected villain. And the man's had a really good villain run, because he was a Bond villain, an Indiana Jones villain, a Doctor Who villain, and he was great every time. I really do like Julian Glover. He is good stuff. There isn't a lot of note to the character, but he just brings his presence, which honestly, that's good enough. Some of his henchmen are a little bit of a mixed bag. There's sort of the KGB heavy, who's a guy named Eric, who's bland and uninteresting. There's a guy named Locke, who's a bit more distinctive, at least in terms of his look. He has these very distinctive glasses. And they actually have this thing with 007 and Q using, what the heck was it called? It was the identigraph. Where Bond just describes this guy, they put it into a computer and run it against databases and find out who he is. And when they first of all, the name's stupid as hell. And when they introduced the concept of what's going to happen, oh, you got to be kidding me. But the process that we watched them go through, it's actually almost believable, despite the dated computer graphics nature of it. I was kind of okay. Actually, for what Bond was able to help Q come up with for a rough look, yeah, if you had a mugshot of the guy, I could see how a computer could match that. Okay, it held up as a technology not of the time that the movie was made, but as a concept, held up. It sold itself a heck of a lot better than I expected it to. So props for that. But Locke has a good menace to him. Also, unnamed, I believe, but Charles Dance is a henchman in this. He doesn't have any line. Well, he starts to have a line, and then he gets shot in the back. But I spotted it. I was like, wait a minute. And then I checked his IMDb. Son of a gun, it is him. But actually, Locke. Also, there's a great moment where Locke gets killed, and it again illustrates the strength of Moore's being lighter and a bit campier and a bit more flippant and not taking things as seriously most of the time. Because earlier in the film, his contact in, I think it was Italy, or at least his contact was Italian, wherever the heck it was. I mean, it jumps locations. Bond movies always do. He comes back to his car, and Luigi, who was his contact, he's dead. And Bond, finds this little keepsake on the body. And so later on in the film, where Lorac's car is teetering on the edge of this cliff, Bond just walks up to it calmly, holds up the little thing, says, "You left this behind," tosses it in the car, and then just cold kicks the car off the cliff. And why I bring that up is because him going cold and personal really works, because it contrasts against how he is the rest of the time. With someone like Connery, and honestly a lot of the time Daniel Craig's Bond, he's so gruff and determined all the time that individual instances of it don't hit as hard. It's actually the moments of levity that can stand out more with those sorts of interpretations of Bond. But here, because he's normally fairly lighthearted, fairly jokey, when he gets serious, it lands. It lands really well. For the most part, this is pretty well paced in terms of how it moves through the story and, justifying going from location to location. There are a few odd things, there are a couple of instances where the action scenes kind of stack up on top of each other, back to back, that felt a little okay, that's at least one more than you needed. For example, Bond has this ski chase, basically, that goes on for a while, and it's pretty good. Actually, Bond does ski chases pretty well between this and Her Majesty's Secret Service. But that goes on for a little while, and then he goes and says goodbye to BB at an ice rink. And then after BB leaves, these 3 hockey people in hockey pads show up on the ice to start beating up and Bond and presumably trying to kill him. Again, one of the camper moments, because if you've got him there, why don't you just shoot him? What's with the gimmickry? I don't know. But anyways, but it's coming right on the heels of an action scene that just ended. And later on, we've got underwater stuff, and there's an underwater fight, an underwater chase, and then they're immediately captured as soon as they get back up to the boat so he can get to a death trap situation. First of all, if they were up on the boat waiting for him to come up anyway, why were they trying to kill him when he was still down in the water? Seems like a waste of energy, and seems like an unnecessary risk. Considering that, in the struggle, the thing that they were after, this ATAC machine, could have gotten destroyed or broken. I don't know. But so those stack up on top of each other in a couple of instances. And also the underwater stuff, while pretty well shot, goes on too long. Here's the problem with underwater action scenes especially, is they're slow. They have to be. You can only move so fast in water. So we get a slow motion fight followed by a slow motion chase. And it's not that exciting. It can't be. So the whole underwater segment goes on definitely longer than it needed to. But once they get back up, I mentioned sort of the death trap scenario. What Kristatos does is he ties Melina and Bond to the back of his boat and just drags them through the water over coral reefs so that they'll get cut up and bleed and attract sharks. And the thing is, it's actually one of the better elaborate death trap scenarios for a couple of reasons. The first is, it wasn't like a grand plan. This is just what Kristatos decided to do. He's like, oh, you know what? I'm going to kill you this way. I can. Why not? Sounds fun. So it doesn't have that sense of, ooh, this is a big elaborate plan, which is always the big failing of the elaborate death traps. Because if you put this much time into planning things, just shoot him. Whereas this feels much more like a whim because he's having fun. And that helps sell it a heck of a lot better. And again, it's pretty well shot, and unlike the actual underwater stuff, doesn't drag on for nearly as long. So that was pretty good stuff. The Saint Cyrils, where his final base is, it's this monastery on top of this just outcrop. It's like cliffs on all 4 sides. It's a pretty impressive location, and there's a surprising amount of tension in Bond having to rock climb it. They do drag that out for a little longer than any. Honestly, the movie's about 2 hours. It probably should be about hour 45, hour 50 at the most. Not because you need to remove maybe remove the hockey fight, but it's not because you need to remove major scenes, but just because there's a few things could have been tightened, could have been shortened, and probably would have had a little bit better pacing. Even though the pacing overall is not bad, it just could have been tighter. Oh, it just occurred to me that I completely skipped over the cold open on this, which is an odd thing that goes on. So it starts with Bond at Tracy's grave, which actually makes this a fitting follow-on for me from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which actually does a bit of an odd thing because this completely kills the idea that each new face of Bond is actually somebody else, and that James Bond is a code name that comes with the 00 designation, because this isn't the same Bond, in theory, who got married to Tracy, yet here he is at Tracy's grave. So this is firmly establishing, yes, this is definitely the same person. So there's that. And then we get this helicopter chase action scene with Blofeld, but not Blofeld. And, okay, I need to explain this in case you haven't seen it in a while or haven't seen it at all. So there was actually a whole big rights dispute over Blofeld and Spectre as concepts. That's why there's the James Bond knockoff film, Never Say Never Again, which isn't part of the franchise proper, but uses a lot of those things because there was this rights dispute with another company or another guy. I forget the details. It's messy. Copyright stuff always is. But it wasn't they couldn't actually use Blofeld, or if they could, they had to bring in this person who was giving them all this other trouble, and they didn't want to do that. So what they ended up doing is you only ever see him from behind. You don't see his face. His name is never said. He's bald with a neck brace, which seems to be cueing off of Saint Cyrils, which makes sense since that was on Her Majesty's Secret Service and they're referencing that. Even though we've seen a Blofeld that isn't that Blofeld between then and now, but anyways. And, stroking the white cat. So there's all the cues for you to assume that it is Blofeld, but they technically never say it, and he's not named that anywhere in the film or in the credits or anywhere else. But since we are meant to take this as being Blofeld, it is kind of an FU. I'm sure it was intended as an FU to the guy who was giving them trouble over the rights. But it feels like an FU to the legacy. Because, Blofeld is remote controlling this helicopter that Bond is on with the intention of crashing it and killing him. And Bond is able to disable the remote control, take control of the thing, use the front bit of the helicopter, like the sort of the things that it lands on, to scoop up the wheelchair that this guy's in and drop him down a smokestack, which is fairly comedic. It presumably kills him. A fall like that would have killed anybody. But it's dismissive. And it basically is going like, and we'll never deal with that again. But it is such an odd way to dispose of the major iconic recurring villain of this franchise. And it's dismissive in a way that if you don't know the behind the scenes copyright nonsense, just feels like a big middle finger to the franchise itself and to its own history. So it doesn't play quite right. And also actually James himself, the fact that he's snarking, especially given that we just reestablished, Tracy as a concept, and that Tracy's dead, and if this is meant to be Blofeld, Blofeld's responsible. It's very odd to me that he's quipping about it when he kills the guy, and he's like all jokey. I'm like, this is the guy who had your wife killed. A little more solemnity, a little more seriousness would have been called for this instance. The cold open isn't good, ultimately. But really only because of the implications that this is Blofeld. Take that part out of it, and the cold open's fine. So, there's that. Couple of other random things before I wrap up. I do like that at that compound that I mentioned where Melina and Bond have to escape from later. When Bond gets there, like, a whole bunch of the guards are distracted or delayed by just bikini girls. And, like, they're not deployed to be distractions. Like, there's just, it's this guy's having a pool party, and there's all these women in bikinis. And, like, there's one guy on duty, but this woman comes over and starts making out with him, so he doesn't notice when Bond comes out and sneaks in. And then even when Melina kills one of the guys, this guy tries to get up, with the gun and be like, oh, I'll kill whoever's causing this trouble. But, like, he has to push this bikini girl off him, and he's clearly, like, stalling, fumbling with his gun. I like that the gratuitous bikini-clad women are actually a detriment to the villains who had them around in the first place. I kind of love that. Oh, the one other thing about Melina, which, like, I remember even first time I saw this, I was like, wait, what? When she gets ready to kill Christados at the end, Bond stops her. And he's like, no, because before he had done the old, when you go for revenge, be sure to dig 2 graves. And he's like, no, be sure you dig that second grave or whatever. Well, first of all, Christados does still get killed just by another completely different character. A guy named Columbo. Good character. He's a lot of fun. But the guy's gonna die anyway. And it's not like she hasn't killed up to this point. She's killed several people. So you're not protecting her innocence. You're not saving her from dirtying her hands. They're already dirty. Why are you stopping her from the one she actually came here to kill? I'm not saying there's no way to make that work, but they just don't put in the effort. It's very token. It's very weird. And she earned that kill. Sorry, Columbo. You totally just stole her kill. Not cool, dude. Not cool. I think that's about it. I know I mostly sort of did nitpicky stuff, but the thing is, like, overall, it's just solid. It's just good, solid work. Oh, some of the music, though, is some of the most 80s, early 80s stuff ever. Not all of it, but some of it I'm like, really? Wow. But it's a good time. It's a good, usually, mostly grounded Cold War story, which I think Bond really kind of needed, especially at this point. And Roger Moore's still good in the part when he did this. He's showing his age a bit, but again, they kind of hang a lampshade on that with the conversation between him and BB and him being like, I'm too old for you. It's like, well, yeah, yeah, you are. So it's like, it's self-aware enough so that someone like Roger Moore still works in it, but like it's taking things more seriously. It's appreciating the gravity of more of what's going on, and it's good. I think it's still pretty good, despite, either realizing or remembering weird little quirks about it that make it not quite work in some areas. But for your eyes only, you seen it? You rewatched it lately? What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. I hope there's a link to my Patreon. YouTube's been really iffy about that working lately. So link in the description. This is in fact my job. And that is how you commission me to review things. If you are thinking that you want to subject me to watching something that maybe I'd like and maybe I wouldn't. Only one way to find out. But even if you don't do that, usual stuff like share, subscribe, all of it helps me out. But no pressure for that either. Take a relaxed attitude around here so you can just come on back next time you need a break.